Hi, it's time for a chime video. This is just going to be a really quick one because I ran across something that was kind of interesting. So this is a NuTone 8-note chime base that was made in September of 1954. And that makes this a K model chime. When this came in from a customer to be repaired, the first thing I noticed was it's brown. Why is it brown? I don't know. Almost all K model chime bases I have ever seen, in fact not almost all, but every single one I've ever seen, the chassis are all painted black. And this is right in the middle of 1954. It's not like it's at the very beginning or at the tail end when maybe they were making some kind of change. K model chime bases are black. So why is this one brown? I don't have any idea. Perhaps they ran out of black paint in Cincinnati in 1954 and all they could get was brown. I don't know why. So that was just an interesting kind of thing that I noticed. The other thing that I noticed on this when I went to take it apart today to repair it is that the caps on the back of the solenoid tubes are yellow, and they're some kind of plastic kind of material. Yellow end caps made out of plastic, they didn't really start being used by NuTone until you get somewhere into the mid-1980s. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And then when I took it apart, and I'm going to take this apart for you, even though I've already finished it. What I found was, we'll put that aside for right now. Oh look, there's the spring. What did I tell you about springs? Have you watched any of my other chime videos? Do you know what happens to springs when they're out in the wild? You drop it on the floor and it rolls away and you never can find it again. So what are you supposed to do? Well, what you're supposed to do when you take the spring out is you're supposed to have your little metal cup and you put the spring in the cup, because if you don't, it's going to disappear and then you're going to be sad and then you're going to call me and say, hey, have you got any springs? Because I lost one. So don't lose the springs. Put it in a cup. Anyway, when I took it apart, what I found was this. This is the plunger assembly, but this is not a plunger assembly from a 1954 K model chime. This is a plunger assembly from a much later, probably mid-80s or early 90s NuTone 8-note chime. So what this and the other thing I found, which I've already put them away so I can't show it to you, is the spring that came out from in front of the plunger was not this spring. It was a mid-80s or early 90s NuTone spring. And while that spring is the same diameter as this spring, it is about 1/2 the length. It's a much shorter spring. So what does this tell me? Well, so this tells me that someone's had a go at this chime before and did some service and repair on it at some point, probably because it wasn't working, they needed to fix it. So what did they do? Well, I don't know when that was done, but up until about 10 or 15 years ago, you could order all kinds of parts for NuTone chimes from NuTone directly, or from a service center like us. And one of the things that you could order would be replacement solenoid assemblies. And the solenoid assemblies that you could buy were for the current models of chimes. They weren't for K model chimes or L model chimes. They were for the chimes that they started making in the late 70s up until the point that you couldn't get them anymore. So you would get, as an assembly, you would get a solenoid, and it would include the spring, the plunger, a cushion, and a yellow cap. And they were service and repair parts. If you had a bad one for some reason, something happened to it, a service center or a consumer could order it, and you could replace the entire solenoid assembly. It didn't come in a bag of little pieces. It was all pre-assembled, and you would mount it in your chassis, and you would connect up the wires, and you'd be good to go. So that was pretty easy. The thing about those modern ones are the actual solenoid assembly, this part right here, the metal frame with the electromagnetic coil inside of it, the part that's covered up with the, looks like paper. The later ones than this, they're not the same size and they're not the same shape, and they also don't mount in the base in exactly the same way. So the newer ones, the ones from the late 80s and early 90s, they won't fit into a K model chassis. That would be too easy. What the person did, most likely, was they ordered 4 of those, and then they realized that the actual solenoid assemblies wouldn't fit, so they did what seemed very reasonable to them, which was they robbed the parts out of them, they put the spring back in the tube, and they put the plunger in the tube, like that, and they put the cushion back on the end. And I know there were cushions because there were cushion remnants inside the caps, and then they put the caps on. And if they cleaned it all up properly and everything, odds are it worked. And they were probably happy, and they probably threw the solenoid parts away, but they didn't care because their door chime worked again, and they were good with that. So what did we do with this? Well, this was a pretty standard K-model chime rebuild, even though it's brown and it's supposed to be black, but it's not. So either way, we did what we normally do. We replaced all the rubber grommets. We serviced the Telecron motor assembly. We cleaned all of the solenoid bores. We cleaned all the plungers. We made new cushions because the other cushions had kind of disintegrated. The cushions that they used to use in the 80s and 90s, they were very much like a thin piece of weather stripping foam. Doesn't hold up very well. So they just sort of over time disintegrate. So we made new cushions, but we kept the original plungers because they're in good shape. All in all, they're very close to the same total overall length as the original ones were. And since coming up with 4 K-model plungers is kind of tough sometimes, there was nothing wrong with these, so we retained those. However, what we did do was we took out the short modern springs that the person had installed from the replacement assemblies, and we put in 4 of our specially made K-model chime springs because it's important to have the right length of springs in these, because the length of the spring has a lot to do with the length of the tube in the solenoid assembly, and these are longer than in later chimes. A shorter spring doesn't work as well. None of it was a big deal. It was just a little surprising to find all of these little variations. It's surprising what you find when you work on a lot of the same products over and over and over again. We repair many NuTone K-model chime bases every single year. While it would be nice if there was sort of a natural progression in how the design changes over time, you see these unusual variations that sort of get plopped into the middle of the timeline for no apparent reason. NuTone seemed to be always working on and modifying and changing their designs. Probably a lot of it had to do with saving costs for assembly or for parts. For instance, on later model K chime bases, the rubber grommets were eliminated, probably because they didn't really feel they were necessary anymore. But anyway, it's just was an interesting variation on a 1954 K model chime. I hope you found this interesting and perhaps helpful. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up on YouTube, because that always helps. There'll be a banner right here that shows you how to subscribe. Go to our YouTube homepage, click on the bell or on the wheel, put in your email address, and every time we post a new video, you'll get a notification and you can watch it. That's all for today. See you on the next video.